Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Trust in the Hybrid World, the Conversation Hub. It's Michael Short and I here today. Michael, do you want to just introduce yourself first, and then I'll introduce myself?
Very quickly, I think we've done this before, much longer ones in the previous history, but I'm the CEO, founder of the consortium, worked with Tarn over many years, as well as other colleagues. And my background is I've CEO'd about 5 companies and love people and passion and potential that people have to make businesses great.
Thanks, Michael. So I'm Tanya Lee, partner within Coachworks Consortium and founder of Emperor Coaching. My passion as well is about people, helping them release their power and potential so they can reach their full potential. And we're having a conversation hub every week with a variety of people to talk about the key topics, or the key topics we think are key. So the next 30 minutes, we will be talking about trust in the hybrid world. We will leave a little bit of time at the end. So if you have any questions, please pop them into the chat, but we won't get them to the end because there is a little bit of a lag sometimes and it disrupts the flow. But before we talk about trust, I want to talk about hybrid. A few years ago, we probably didn't even have these conversations about hybrid. The pandemic forced us into remote and hybrid working and really became a test bed. But post-pandemic, the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, has said that 28% of organisations and people now work in a hybrid way, with 83% of organisations having some hybrid patterns or arrangements in some form, may not be as formalised. So I think it's fair to say that hybrid working is here to stay. The statistics also show that people tend to be more highly satisfied and engaged with hybrid working. However, there is a team connection challenge with it. So trust is a really big part of this. And Michael, I don't know whether you want to talk about the trust equation. It's something we talk about all the time, and I know we talked about it last week. But I think it's really important because trust talks about connection.
Yes, it does indeed, Tarn. And particularly it talks about within the trustworthiness in part of the equation. There's 2 parts. There's trusting and trustworthiness. And we did refer to it last week, and that's all visible on our, if you go to our YouTube or you go to the LinkedIn pages, you can find all the slides and that we've used. So the key part is that you need to generate this intimacy. And by that, we're talking about authenticity, and we're talking about connection, and we're talking about personal one-to-one trust. And that is a really important part of hybrid working. And what we mean by that is if you're not trustworthy, so you might have all the credibility and all the reliability in the world, which are the other 2 parts, but if you're not, if you don't have intimacy, so you can actually create relationships from the hybrid structure, then trust starts to dissipate. And the other thing we hear, I'm sure you're going to come on to, is at some point during this conversation, is that people often misalign themselves or believe that people work from home out of some self-interest. They're doing it for their own convenience. And this immediately undermines trustworthiness if people believe that. So I think that's how this really does play into the topic today that we have of hybrid working.
Yeah, and I think, the word intimacy, we talk about this all the time when we're in organisations, Michael, right? Intimacy, people have this moment of, whoa, what do you mean by intimacy? Because we use it very interchangeably with our partners, our better halves. Mine's definitely my better half. But actually, it really is about knowing somebody really well? What motivates that person? What are their values? What do they really enjoy doing? So you can have a conversation with them about something that's really important to them. So you truly know them. You know, as we said, there's 3 parts to this. Well, there's 4 parts, really, isn't it? It's the credibility, the reliability, and that intimacy, completely wiped out by self-interest, as we just talked about. And your credibility is that, you know, I've got the credential to do this job. People find me credible. Reliable, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. The intimacy is the hardest part. And I think one of the things that has really come out of hybrid working and building that intimacy, because we don't have the water cooler conversations. We don't have that I'm going to meet someone in the corridor and have a chat. We don't tend to have, we'll go for a drink after work, we'll go for a coffee after work, let's do lunch together and just sit and chat. So for me, one of the really big things to build trust in the hybrid world is to be intentional.
I think that's a very good point. The intention, and we talk about with intimacy as well, emotional security, or the safety one feels when entrusting another person with something that is either personal or makes you vulnerable. And again, that plays into leadership as well, about vulnerability. So I'm really interested for us to continue the discussion about the hybrid part of how you get to work effectively and efficiently as a hybrid team rather than just as an individual.
Yeah. And, you know, I think, you know, today really is about trust. So how do you build that trust from both sides? You know, so it is about trusting that people are working from home. And some of it may be that they get a better life balance. And I hate the word work-life balance, because actually my life has work in it. It's a life balance. How do I balance my life effectively? So there may be some part of that. I want to be able to pick my kids up from school, drop them off, want to be able to go and play football. And if I've got a 2-hour round trip, I can't do that. But that also helps engagement, because they are feeling valued by their organisation, that they are trusted to get the work done. And I think, go on.
That sort of thing that we're really aligning to is, when you're in an office, you're very visible. People know where you are. People, even if you're not working, they sort of know you're there and they feel that you are working. And it's often a very full sense of work, because a lot of people are in an office having coffee and chatting and not really doing very much for parts of the day. And I think what is often missed about hybrid working is the communication, which I think you referred to earlier. How are you communicating your hours of work? How are you communicating what is the real aspect that you're looking to achieve in terms of, well, do you tell the people you're working with, not your boss, but that's important too, but are you telling people, oh, I'm available between 8 and 10 to pick up the phone and discuss problems? I've blocked out my diary from 11 to 1 because I'm busy. I'm doing, you know, it's that when you're in physically in an office, you shut the door, or you put a little note on the side of your work cubicle or whatever it's saying, do not disturb, or I'm busy, or whatever, and people can see you. Whereas when you're working from home and they can't get hold of you, there is a challenge of the assumption that, oh, she's gone to the bloody shops, or he's out, you know, sort of going for a walk with a dog, or none of which are a problem unless you're not communicating and not making it clear that you are available and you're available at these times. And this ties in for me immediately back into when we coach people, and I know you do the same, is when is your quiet time? When is your thinking time? When have you told people that you're actually not available to engage in general discussion because you are, it might be half an hour, might be 20 minutes. You might do it while you're walking the dog, going to the gym, whatever it is. These are all productive times, but you must make it clear to people when you're going to be doing these things and why it is productive.
Yeah, I think for me, you've just talked about two things. And one is that proximity bias, that, you talked about assumptions, bias, whatever we want to call it, is, you have that proximity does not mean productivity, right? Just because you're visible.
Yes.
And you might look like you're working. There's a great meme out there at the moment that someone just typing frantically. Well, unless you're standing behind them, you don't know what they're typing frantically. So removing that proximity bias. And I know as a leader years ago, I definitely had that proximity bias. When somebody was working from home, I was like, well, what are they doing? I can't get hold of them. Well, if I'm in an office, I know they've nipped to the loo. You can actually nip to the loo at home, or you can go and make yourself a coffee at home. So I think, removing that proximity bias and working out that proximity does not equal performance.
That is such a beautiful phrase. Proximity does not equal performance. Proximity does not equal productivity. No. These phrases, which we all use in consulting and management to put across nuggets to people, I think they really are gold dust for people to try and understand what hybrid working actually means from both ends of the spectrum, from both the person wishing to partake in it and the person who's being asked to sanction it. Or indeed, then we get into if your business has made a decision, and we hear a lot about the civil service at the moment going to do this. We hear a lot about larger scale businesses that are moving from office-based to hybrid working and reducing office spaces. How have you actually defined that working environment? How have you actually told people this is how you expect it to work? And then, as we also talk about in communication, how have you asked them, how do they see it working? And have you created a communication loop, or have you just broadcast to everybody, oh, we're going hybrid working, that means you'll be working from home Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, see you Monday and Friday? I mean, that's what does that mean?
Yeah, and I think this comes back to that intentional communication, or intentional building that intimacy. So, for example, I've talked to organizations about, if you are in a hybrid world, do you give 5 minutes at the beginning of every call where you just pair people off into Zoom breakout rooms just to have a general conversation about what did you do at the weekend, so that you're building that knowledge and that intimacy up. But also that really clear communication about boundaries, expectations. One of the things that come out of hybrid working is that connection to mission and vision. So how great are we at communicating? What is our mission and vision? What is acceptable behaviors? What are inspirational behaviors? And we talk about this. Judith, who works in our consortium, often talks about what are the inspirational behaviors we expect.
Yes. And that inspirational behavior, it often comes across in things such as authentic stories, telling a story about how you've achieved or how you failed. And what I'm also drawn to immediately from, as we always have when we have these conversations, it's wonderful because it pulls different things together and stimulates the mind. But immediately you've taken me into that issue of, well, if there's a vacuum and people are being asked to fill a vacuum of information or knowledge or measurement or whatever it is, well, if it's a vacuum, they'll make it up. They will actually put in the rules that suit them because you haven't told them or haven't allowed them to be part of that discussion. Well, what happens? That appears to be very self-interested, and again we get the undermining of trust. But it's because you've not provided that really important baseline that says, okay, when you work in a hybrid way, this is what we expect, this is what we will do, this is how we will communicate this. And people suddenly expect, people will learn overnight and do things in a way that they have come to expect them to do, rather than giving them the guidance and the guidelines.
Yeah, and this comes back to that intentionality, because we have to be so much more intentional.
Yes.
And actually communicate without micromanaging. And I think that's the challenge sometimes from a trust point of view. You don't actually need to know what somebody is doing every minute of the day as a leader. And one of the things as a leader is understanding what biases am I bringing with me. We talk about, we've talked about this before, Michael, transactional analysis. Who else do I bring in the room with me? Which is those biases, those beliefs, those value systems that we brought up from when we were a child, actually. And also within the working world was, well, you were in an office when you worked. Well, that's no longer reality. And it's not going to be reality. So we have to build some more intentional and different practices in to build trust. And you just very clearly talked about psychological safety as well. I love explaining it as rewarded vulnerability. You talked about vulnerability earlier. Michael, I would love to understand your thoughts on what psychological safety is and how it helps with the trust.
Well, thank you. Let's talk very quickly through what I call the 4 steps that we all know through Clark. We are great believers in that, and her name's going to go out of my head, of course, the lady at MIT,
Amy Edmondson.
Yes, thank you. that small person who's done a bit of work in this field. So I like the Clark approach because it talks about bringing people into the team. It talks about integrating them into it. It talks about them being members. It talks about them being included at the beginning, and then it talks about learning safety. What is the safety of learning? That's the ability to ask questions, make mistakes, to actually learn through putting your own experience into the discussion that allows you to accrete learning in a better way. And everybody has a different learning style. So you need to establish those as the baseline, that people are included, inclusion safety, then people have a learner safety, a learning safety. Then we get to the 2 really big parts of where an organization starts to shine. The first part is in collaborative safety. How do you collaborate? And again, this all comes down to what are the rules? What are the metrics? What are the unwritten values of the group? How do they collaborate together? How do people become included? And again, you and I, both being GCologists, also know the value of the GC index in terms of helping people to be included in that discussion and collaboration. What type of energies do they have? Where do they want to have impact? And there's some great stuff now coming out with AI, and how do we get AI into that whole area, which helps us. These are all new things that are helping us. And finally, we get that last, which very few teams actually get to, the safety of challenger. Now, what I mean by that, and everybody knows the awkward bonce who walks in and he says or she says, "Oh, well, I think you're doing it all wrong," or "I think you're not doing anything right." That's not challenger. That's just being obtuse and difficult. When you offer a challenge, it needs to be, this is what I think is the problem with our approach, and this is how I would suggest either we could look at it differently, or how we might interpret new things into this. And challenges are welcomed, and other organizations call them disruptors. I don't really mind, but those collaboration, and challenger safety areas are the key parts of psychological safety. And the final part, you wouldn't expect me to go through without saying this, it's not a linear continuum. People, when you move into a new team, you might immediately become a learner. Even having been a high collaborator and challenger, you might be a learner in that new team or in that reconfiguration or whatever it is. So again, as we talk through, I've lost you. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. As we're still thinking about these things, what is it that we want to achieve that allows the team to work together, input with their best potential, really make that delivery a kinetic delivery of that potential? And whether it's GC index, whether it's a trust equation, whether it's taking some coaches as a team, as an individual, whether it's the psychological safety that you've brought into the organization, these are the key factors to get the most out of the people who are working for you, not by driving them, not by harnessing them to some wheel, but by giving their potential the opportunity to shine through and contribute.
And I think, really interesting, you can't have psychological safety without trust. So it goes hand in hand, because I am not going to be vulnerable unless I trust that vulnerability is rewarded. And I don't mean I get a prize.
Hang on.
Yeah, exactly. Although it'd be lovely, but actually there is some reward at the end of it. And some of that reward is the innovation, the feeling that I feel safe to make a mistake and put my hand up and own it. But unless we do all that, we cannot have a truly functioning hybrid team, or any team. Doesn't matter whether we're hybrid, in the office or remote. So trust is the foundation to psychological safety.
Yes. We sit with clients and ask them about, what is it that you want to achieve? Why are you going to do? Why are you doing this? What is it you seek to achieve, and how are you going to do it? And whenever we talk about these things, the key component is always about, how do individuals contribute to what you're seeking to achieve? How do they then multiply their effect in a team structure? And as you've just rightly said, if there's no psychological safety and no trust, the output is going to be very limited and very restricted. And it's a shame, really, that so many organizations go through this cycle of generating trust and then changing leadership and losing trust, and they have to rebuild it again. And we've talked recently with a client about, they changed their values. I don't really remember the conversation we were on. And someone said, I don't understand why we've dropped this value. I don't understand why this value, it meant everything. Virtually, they said it meant everything to me. And I'm always interested when companies change their values to ask them the why question. And how much trust are you leaving on the table or leaving behind when you change the values? And what do values mean to individuals, and how have they come to trust the organization through those values? And when you're finally doing that, and this organization is, as we both know, was highly hybrid. God, can I say that? Highly hybrid orientated. They had people, in fact, one person we were talking to was working to as well with his family in Denmark. So, these sort of questions are key to organizational performance and change as we move forward in the modern world, and how all the different things about AI and data and how we work and the authenticity of how we work can be brought to the table.
Yeah, and I'm really conscious we don't have long left, but I'd love to share an example of hybrid working as I was when I was working for a global organization. So it wasn't at the time called hybrid working. But I worked for an organization that was global, and I worked on a lot of business transformation projects. And our head office was in the States. And most people were based in the States, and then we had regional offices. When we were on projects, quite often everybody was in the room in the US, and anyone regionally was on it was a phone at the time, so it wasn't even a Zoom or Teams call. You're on the phone. And actually, one of the really big things about being intentional in those rooms is when we had great project managers, we had high trust with them because they knew every voice would be heard, and they had to be really intentional about that. So this proximity bias, I'm in the room with the guys in the US, and Europe are on different calls, and Europe and APAC actually. So they had to be very intentional about how they managed it, and they were very clear. This is a communication on how they were going to manage it. So really clear boundaries. We're not going to have internal chats in the room. If we're sharing something, we're sharing it with everybody. They were very intentional in bringing people in to have conversations, and we felt valued and trusted that our point of view made sense. So I really want to just full circle back to what we talked about. For me, to build trust in the hybrid world, the biggest word that I can think to say is we have to be really intentional.
Great line. And you used the very interesting word that we always throw these words into our speech, emotional words. You use the word felt.
Yeah.
That's a highly emotional word because no one can tell you how you feel.
Absolutely.
And that's a great place, Tom, that you pulled out the emotional part of communication and hybrid working. It's all about, have you created that intimacy that's based around emotional communication, or are you riding roughshod over people because you don't understand them?
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, just to finish this off, to round this off, we're having these conversations weekly, same time, 9:30 on a Wednesday. Please let us know by going to cultureworksconsortium.com if there is anything else you want to cover, or whether you want to delve deeper into some of these conversations. Please contact us. But yeah, again, sorry, go on, Michael.
No, I just wanted to ask, we've got a colleague, the lovely Kenna, I know is watching on LinkedIn Live. Sometimes we get questions in LinkedIn Live that don't feed through into the studio. So I just wondered whether she could perhaps tell us about, make sure there's nothing that we're missing, if that makes sense. But I'm just looking now to see.
We've got one comment which says intention, key aspect for hybrid working. 100% agree. Yes. So there is nothing else that I can see that's come up, and I'm very conscious that we've got 1 minute to finish.
Why don't you finish us off, because you've come up with some really fantastic.
I think by finishing us off, it's let's be intentional. Let's build intimacy. Let's unpick what our biases are around, if we have them, around hybrid remote working, and unpick them and understand why we have them. And then please let us know if you want anything else in these conversations, or if you want to dig deeper. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you. And that's great. Bye-bye.
Bye.